So you ever been in this situation? Pulled into a company, all hands, or a big organization meeting. There's a lot of people there, and they go to make this exciting update, and they announce this big promotion of an SDE from the junior level to maybe a higher level, and then they break the news and it's somebody else, and your immediate thought is, what the hell? This person's been at the company less time than you. Maybe they're less experienced than you. Maybe they're not doing things that are as important as you. Maybe there's a million things that are going on where you feel like you should be promoted, and this other guy, maybe he doesn't deserve it as much as you. I mean, we've all been there. We've all had that pit in our stomach, and we've all thought to ourselves, when will it be my turn? So my name's Ken. I was a software engineering manager at Amazon, and I helped a couple of engineers get promoted from SDE-I to SDE-II. In this process, I've done a lot of coaching with the various people on my team and really help you understand the most important things that you need to understand in order to get to that next level. So hopefully this video is helpful and it helps you understand the things that are most important when you're looking to get that next step and get that promotion to a more senior engineer. So one of the people on my team comes up to me on a one-on-one and says, "Hey Ken, how am I doing?" Which is a great question to ask. Always ask your manager how you're doing and get the feedback, and as well as having the positive feedback about all the great work that you're doing as well. So he asked that, and I told him all the great things that you could expect. You've been knocking it out of the park. I really appreciate you've stepped it up to the next level. You're really delivering excellent results, and I feel like I can really trust you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and just keep up the good work. You're really knocking it out of the park. The next question that comes up is, so when do you think that we can make a promotion happen? Because I think that I've been working really hard, and I think that I deserve it. So it brings up kind of an interesting point, because there's a couple things that don't get you promoted, and one of those is working real hard, and the other one is meeting the expectations of your current job. So basically, in order to get promoted to the next level, what you have to do is you have to understand what the expectations are for your next level, and then you have to actually start meeting those expectations instead of the expectations that your manager has for you in what your current position is. Start by thinking about the work that they can do. So to start off with, we can start thinking about feature work. So this is probably what most people think about when it comes to software engineering, and this is adding specific features to applications that exist. So if you imagine an application that maybe already has been launched, it has an ability to export some data in a CSV format. That application exists, and some feature work that could exist is to enhance that. Maybe add a new column that you extract from some other database or some other service or something like that. You're working within the confines of what already exists, shipping it live, adding any tests, making sure it works, and making sure it's functional. So this is feature level work, and this is the type of stuff that we'll generally expect a junior engineer to be able to do relatively quickly once they get up to speed with the technology. So let's talk about this next level. So this next level is the component level of the application. And if you think about it, you zoom out, a component is an entire grouping of similar type functionality that is all using similar code and kind of in the same packages and kind of in the same area. And you usually want to have the entire component be coherent, related, and basically well designed. Thinking back to the example that we were talking about before with the exporting data to CSV, you can think about adding some features to an existing CSV as feature work, but we could think about building an entire data export layer as potentially an entire component within our application. So this layer could do things like export to CSV. Maybe we could export to JSON. Maybe in addition to that, we could accept multiple different flags for different optional parameters. Maybe we could do filtering of the data that comes in and be smart about the data that we're giving back. The component would exist then contain all of the stuff around that, but it would be a little bit of a bigger component as opposed to being super zoomed in on adding some functionality that is just immediately being asked for today by the product team. So now if we zoom out one more layer, we can start thinking about how multiple components can potentially exist in the same application, but the application itself is a grouping of the functionality that the users are actually engaging with, as well as potentially external services that both our application might be interacting with, as well as other people's applications as well. So this is sort of how the ecosystem and how your brain should be thinking about the applications and the designs of the software that you're building on a particular project. So SDE-Is are generally expected to start out working on feature work and then to eventually zoom out and own an entire component. Throughout their career, they'll build it up, they'll get more and more complexity in there, and they might end up owning a couple of different components as well. But generally speaking, they're not going to really understand the forest through the trees and understand how the whole application fits together, especially if it's a really complex one. If it's a very simple one, they might be able to understand how all the pieces fit together, but if it's a complex one, they're probably going to have the expertise in one or a couple of different components. And that's kind of how the difference is between an SDE-I and an SDE-II, where the SDE-II is more thinking at this application level. So they're zoomed out and they can see sort of how all the different pieces of the application fit together. So they can potentially have responsibility for an entire application. And a lot of times there's a lot of different applications that teams will ultimately own. Sometimes there'll be some like small utilities that the team owns, which isn't an application in itself. There's also other services, which are also the entirety of a project, as well as the main flagship application that your team is probably currently developing. But in general, there's probably maybe 3 to 4 projects that are substantial enough and standalone enough for an SDE-II to actually really have standalone expertise within. So a single team is going to own a bunch of stuff. A bunch of these applications, a bunch of these services, and this is going to be built up of the different components that exist inside the application altogether. But inside the organization, there's going to be a bunch of teams that have a bunch of stuff, and that's kind of the level of the SDE-III, which is kind of zoomed out even more so than on the team level, and thinking about how across teams are applications architected, how are components built, is there a lot of duplicate work, is there rework being done that can be collaborative or something like that, how can we make this process as easy as possible? And the SDE-IIIs are zoomed out at the whole organization level, thinking about how the different teams can interact with each other in smarter ways. So zooming back to the beginning of this conversation, we started this thinking about how can you get promoted to that next level. So the key is that the way to get promoted isn't necessarily to just continue to crank out more feature work and build the component and do more of that stuff, but instead your job is to be able to think more strategically and zoom out to understand how the application itself fits together and have full ownership over something extremely complex instead of something that is fairly complex but maybe is more isolated in nature. So the trap that people fall into here is after they understand the different levels of the strategic components that you can build, basically they want to own a major piece, but maybe it doesn't justify having a standalone service. So here's the thing. Having a standalone service might be something that's complex enough to warrant getting promoted to that SDE-II level, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing for the team, because for every different section, like we said before, there's probably only 4 to 5 of these different things that an individual team can own. And if you start building standalone services for stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense for, there becomes a lot of maintenance and overhead that you have to do. There's a lot of patching when these new packages comes up. There's a lot of expertise. You have to build the documentation, you have to build the run book, you have to build a lot of these things. You have to keep them up to date. So the burden of sort of just spinning up a new service out of the blue in order to justify a promotion to the next level isn't something that, as the manager of the team, I'm going to be super excited about. So instead, what I would want to do is make sure that the service that I'm building or the application that I'm building actually is serving one of the main needs that we have and one of the main deliverables, or will help move us faster along that process. But we don't want to just crank out new applications and new services just for the sake of getting somebody promoted, because right after that promotion happens, that's great for them, but as a manager, I'm still going to be on the hook for maintaining this stuff for my team. So I want to make sure that there's a really solid reason behind each of these, and because of that, I don't want to just spin up a new service kind of out of the blue just for the sake of one engineer who might not even be on the team in a year from now. So as an SDE-I, you probably don't have visibility on what the entire team is doing and really detailed understanding about the major things that are coming down the pipeline for your entire team. There might be a number of new applications, a number of new services, and a number of new things that your manager is currently trying to understand how can they possibly fund this. There's probably a situation where they're looking at their list of things that they have to do and they don't have enough headcount to do and to build enough of these things as possible. So rather than coming to your manager with a solution of, I think we should build a new service for this component thing and let's come up with this and all this, just go up to your manager and say, what projects are coming down the pipeline? What do you think, what are the most complex ones? What are the more interesting ones technically? Like, I'm really curious about this particular one that you're talking about. Like, do you think you could tell me more about it? How are you planning to build it? Are you planning to build it inside the application that you currently are? Do you think there's going to be any other packages? Maybe like there needs to be a new front-end NPM package, or maybe there needs to be a new service or something like that. And start the conversation about the stuff that's already being planned for the team, because there's probably more than enough work and maybe even more than the team is currently at capacity for. So really just understand it and try to figure out from your manager like what new big pieces are in there, and then try to just get a chunk of it and try to do that instead of trying to propose some random idea that probably isn't going to go too far, and it's just because you don't have the visibility on what the entire team is going to be asked to do over the upcoming year, and your manager does. So basically my recommendation to you is start the conversation and try to be excited about some of the upcoming major complex work, as well as build the trust of your manager so they feel safe giving you some major component, as opposed to feeling like that's kind of a risky move where it might not get done on time. So I hope this video was useful. If it was, go ahead and hit that like button at the bottom of the video, as well as maybe the subscribe button. And curious what you're thinking. What's the best career advice that you've ever gotten about how to get to that SDE-II or a more senior software engineering position? Super curious to learn what tips and tricks that you have as well. All right, thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you later.